and thanks for joining me. Today I'm riding the Pacific Coast Highway in California, so that's the Pacific Ocean to my right. I left Monterey about 30 minutes ago and I'm heading south towards Big Sur. It's now about 6:30 in the morning and it's pretty cool actually, which is why I've got my waterproof jacket on. I'm planning to stop for breakfast at about 9 o'clock and by then I'm hoping that it will have warmed up nicely. As you can probably see, I'm riding a Triumph Bonneville T120. That's the modern 1200cc water-cooled Bonneville. I've done about 1,500 miles on this bike over the last 10 days and I'm really enjoying it. If you're a regular visitor to my YouTube channel, you'll know that back home in the UK I own and ride a classic 1978 Bonneville T140, and I therefore thought it would be interesting, having had a chance to ride this Bonneville, to draw a comparison between the two bikes. So just tucking my sleeves in here because it's quite cold. So this video is a comparison of the modern 1200cc water-cooled Bonneville with my classic 750 T140. I'll start by looking at some of the differences between the two bikes and then I'll try and describe how that translates into the riding experience. For a start, there's a big weight difference between the bikes. This T120 weighs 236 kilograms, I believe, whereas my T140 is less than 200 kilograms. I'm not sure of the exact weight, but you can really feel the difference. It's not surprising though that the T120 is much heavier, as it's a 1200cc water-cooled bike, and there's a lot more engine to be hauled around. The second immediately noticeable difference is the seat height. The old oil-in-frame Triumphs were criticised by many for being too tall, and this T120's seat is a good inch, if not more, lower than my T140. Not that that's an issue for me. I'm just over 6 feet tall and I spend a lot of time riding my KTM, which has a seat height of 38 inches, so both these Triumphs feel quite low and comfortable for me. The T120 that I'm riding also has smaller wheels. This bike has an 18-inch front and a 17-inch rear, whereas the T140 has a 19-inch front and an 18-inch rear, and this is possibly one of the factors in why this bike has a lower seat height. This bike also has 6 gears, whereas the T140 has only 5. The earlier models, of course, of the 750s had only 4 gears, but mine's an E model, which came after they added the 5th gear. Interestingly, the modern T100, that's the 900cc little brother of this bike, also has only 5 gears, and Triumph possibly did this as a nod to the heritage of the 70s Bonnevilles. However, the extra gear on this 1200 is definitely useful, particularly on longer highway rides. As you would expect with a modern bike, the brakes on this T120 are much better. It's got 2 310mm discs on the front with Brembo calipers. My T140 has just the one disc, smaller disc, 254mm I think it is, with the Lockheed caliper. Other obvious differences are that this T120 has fuel injection, whereas the T140 has the twin Amel carburetors, and this bike has an electric starter but no kickstart, whereas the T140 has a kickstart but no electric starter. Lastly, I suppose I should point out the obvious power difference. This bike is 1200cc's and generates about 78 brake horsepower, whereas my 750cc T140 knocks out about 55 brake horsepower. But actually, you may be surprised to hear that I don't particularly notice that power difference. I think it's because this is not the kind of bike that you thrash, so when ridden sensibly, both bikes have adequate power for what you need, and it's not really an issue. So how do all of these differences translate into the riding experience then? Straight off, I have to say that this T120 is much easier to ride than my T140. The clutch is lighter, the throttle is lighter, the gearbox is slicker, the engine has more torque and the brakes are stronger. All of this adds up to less effort, which makes the bike less tiring to ride over longer distances. There's also a lot less vibration at high speeds. Actually, there's virtually no vibration, which makes it easier to ride over longer distances. On the other hand, this bike is much heavier than my T140, and I'm really feeling that on this twisty road. The T140 handles much better, unquestionably. It's lighter and it's easier to flick around the corners, and it holds a line beautifully in corners. This T120 feels like the heavy 1200cc bike that it is. You're very much aware that you're riding a much bigger, heavier bike. It's taking much more effort to negotiate these bends, and I'm having to use the throttle and counter steer quite consciously, as I would if I was riding a big Harley. My conclusions then. I think this modern T120 is a wonderful bike, and I've really enjoyed riding it, but it is very different to my classic T140. It's a thoroughly modern bike, it rides like a modern bike, and I have to say that's a good thing. It offers all the conveniences of modern bikes, such as an electric starter, fuel injection, ABS, heated hand grips, and it's even got different rider modes. But at the same time, it looks like a classic bike. So this is a much more sensible bike for touring. It offers more power, it's got modern reliability, longer service intervals, and it's much smoother and more comfortable at highway cruising speeds. And so the clincher, would I swap my classic T140 for a modern T120 like this? Well, the answer is no. I would consider owning both bikes if I had room in my garage, but if I have to choose between the two, I'll stick with my classic T140. However, I still have this bike for several more days yet, so I'm going to continue enjoying it until I have to return it to the rental depot. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the road.